It is not a matter of such complete and utter improbability as some sober people may think, that he would have followed them out, had he not been restrained by what passed between the fat lady and her book keeper. 'When is she coming again, Tom?' asked the fat lady. 'Tomorrow morning,' replied Tom, mending his pen. 'Where have you sent her to?' asked the fat lady. 'Mrs. Clark's,' replied Tom. 'She'll have a nice life of it if she goes there,' observed the fat lady, taking a pinch of snuff from a tin box. Tom made no other reply than thrusting his tongue into his cheek, and pointing the feather of his pen toward Nicholas, reminders which elicited from the fat lady an inquiry of, 'Now, sir, what can we do for you?' Nicholas briefly replied that he wanted to know whether there was any such post to be had as secretary or amanuensis to a gentleman. 'Any such!' rejoined the mistress. 'A dozen such, ain't there, Tom?' 'I should think so,' answered that young gentleman; and as he said it, he winked towards Nicholas with a degree of familiarity which he no doubt intended for a rather flattering compliment, but with which Nicholas was most ungratefully disgusted. Upon reference to the book, it appeared that the dozen secretaryships had dwindled down to one. Mr. Gregsbury, the great member of Parliament of Manchester Buildings, Westminster, wanted a young man to keep his papers and correspondence in order, and Nicholas was exactly the sort of young man that Mr. Gregsbury wanted. 'I don't know what the terms are, as he said he'd settle them himself with the party,' observed the fat lady, 'but they must be pretty good ones, because he's a member of Parliament.' Inexperienced as he was, Nicholas did not feel quite assured of the force of this reasoning, or the justice of this conclusion, but without troubling himself to question it, he took down the address, and resolved to wait upon Mr. Gregsbury without delay. 'I don't know what the number is,' said Tom, 'but Manchester Buildings isn't a large place, and if the worst comes to the worst, it won't take you very long to knock at all the doors on both sides of the way till you find him out. I say, what a good looking gal that was, wasn't she?' 'What girl?' demanded Nicholas sternly. 'Oh yes, I know, what gal, eh?' whispered Tom, shutting one eye, and cocking his chin in the air. 'You didn't see her, you didn't? I say, don't you wish you was me, when she comes tomorrow morning?' Nicholas looked at the ugly clerk as if he had a mind to reward his admiration of the young lady by beating the ledger about his ears, but he refrained, and strode haughtily out of the office, setting at defiance in his indignation those ancient laws of chivalry, which not only made it proper and lawful for all good knights to hear the praise of the ladies to whom they were devoted, but rendered it incumbent upon them to roam about the world, and knock at head all such matter of fact and unpoetical characters as declined to exalt above all the earth damsels whom they had never chanced to look upon or hear of, as if that were any excuse. Thinking no longer of his own misfortunes, but wondering what could be those of the beautiful girl he had seen, Nicholas, with many wrong turns and many inquiries, and almost as many misdirections, bent his steps toward the place whither he had been directed. Within the precincts of the ancient city of Westminster, and within half a quarter of a mile of its ancient sanctuary, is a narrow and dirty region, the sanctuary of the smaller members of Parliament in modern days. It is all comprised in one street of gloomy lodging houses, from whose windows, in vacation time, there frown long melancholy rows of bills, which say as plainly as did the countenances of their occupiers, ranged on ministerial and opposition benches in the session which slumbers with its fathers, To Let, To Let. In busier periods of the year these bills disappear, and the houses swarm with legislators. There are legislators in the parlours, in the first floor, in the second, in the third, in the garrets. The small apartments reek with the breath of deputations and delegates. In damp weather the place is rendered close by the steams of moist acts of Parliament and frowsy petitions. General postmen grow faint as they enter its infected limits, and shabby figures in quest of franks flit restlessly to and fro like the troubled ghosts of complete letter writers departed. This is Manchester Buildings, and here, at all hours of the night, may be heard the rattling of latch keys in their respective keyholes, with now and then, when a gust of wind sweeping across the water which washes the building's feet, impels the sound towards its entrance, the weak, shrill voice of some young member practising tomorrow's speech. All the livelong day there is a grinding of organs, and clashing and clanging of little boxes of music, for Manchester Buildings is an eel pot which has no outlet but its awkward mouth, a case bottle which has no thoroughfare, and a short and narrow neck, and in this respect it may be typical of the fate of some few among its more adventurous residents, who, after wriggling themselves into Parliament by violent efforts and contortions, find that it, too, is no thoroughfare for them, that, like Manchester Buildings, it leads to nothing beyond itself, and that they are fain at last to back out, no wiser, no richer, not one whit more famous than they went in. Into Manchester Buildings Nicholas turned, with the address of the great Mr. Gregsbury in his hand. As there was a stream of people pouring into a shabby house not far from the entrance, he waited until they had made their way in, and then making up to the servant, ventured to inquire if he knew where Mr. Gregsbury lived. The servant was a very pale, shabby boy, who looked as if he had slept underground from his infancy, as very likely he had. "Mr. Gregsbury," said he, "Mr. Gregsbury lodges here. It's all right, come in." Nicholas thought he might as well get in while he could, so in he walked, and he had no sooner done so than the boy shut the door and made off. This was odd enough, but what was more embarrassing was that all along the passage, and all along the narrow stairs, blocking up the window and making the dark entry darker still, was a confused crowd of persons with great importance depicted in their looks, who were, to all appearance, waiting in silent expectation of some coming event. From time to time, one man would whisper his neighbour, or a little group would whisper together, and then the whisperers would nod fiercely to each other and give their heads a relentless shake, as if they were bent upon doing something very desperate, and were determined not to be put off, whatever happened. As a few minutes elapsed, without anything occurring to explain this phenomenon, and as he felt his own position a peculiarly uncomfortable one, Nicholas was on the point of seeking some information from the man next him, when a sudden move was visible on the stairs, and a voice was heard to cry, "Now, gentlemen, have the goodness to walk up." So far from walking up, the gentleman on the stairs began to walk down with great alacrity, and to entreat with extraordinary politeness that the gentleman nearest the street would go first. The gentleman nearest the street retorted with equal courtesy that they couldn't think of such a thing on any account, but they did it without thinking of it, inasmuch as the other gentlemen, pressing some half dozen, among whom was Nicholas, forward, and closing up behind, pushed them not merely up the stairs, but into the very sitting room of Mr. Gregsbury, which they were thus compelled to enter with most unseemly precipitation, and without the means of retreat, the press behind them more than filling the apartment. "Gentlemen," said Mr. Gregsbury, "you are welcome. I am rejoiced to see you." For a gentleman who was rejoiced to see a body of visitors, Mr. Gregsbury looked as uncomfortable as might be, but perhaps this was occasioned by senatorial gravity, and a statesmanlike habit of keeping his feelings under control. He was a tough, burly, thick-headed gentleman, with a loud voice, a pompous manner, a tolerable command of sentences with no meaning in them, and, in short, every requisite for a very good member indeed. "Now, gentlemen," said Mr. Gregsbury, tossing a great bundle of papers into a wicker basket at his feet, and throwing himself back in his chair with his arms over the elbows, "you are dissatisfied with my conduct, I see by the newspapers." "Yes, Mr. Gregsbury, we are," said a plump old gentleman in a violent heat, bursting out of the throng and planting himself in the front. "Do my eyes deceive me?" said Mr. Gregsbury, looking towards the speaker, "or is that my old friend Pugstyles?" "I am that man, and no other, sir," replied the plump old gentleman. "Give me your hand, my worthy friend," said Mr. Gregsbury. "Pugstyles, my dear friend, I am very sorry to see you here." "I am very sorry to be here, sir," said Mr. Pugstyles, "but your conduct, Mr. Gregsbury, has rendered this deputation from your constituents imperatively necessary." "My conduct, Pugstyles," said Mr. Gregsbury, looking round upon the deputation